So welcome to the 10th Civil Affairs Roundtable that I have had the great pleasure and honor of helping to put together. We've been doing this now for 10 years, since 2013. The annual cycle continues. And this, of course, ends the annual cycle with a feedback to the policy level and brief back from the policy level on civil affairs issues centered around the idea of the future of civil affairs. Of course, this year's theme is civil affairs, of course, winning without fighting. First thing I want to do is acknowledge all our partners and sponsors, the Association of the U.S. Army, Modern War Institute, and Irregular Warfare Initiative at the West Point, the U.S. Army Peacekeeping and Stability Operations Institute, Special Operations University, NATO Civil Military Cooperation Center of Excellence, or CCOE. Welcome to all our friends from across the pond. Joint Civil Military Interaction. Sponsors are the Patriot Fund, the Third Order Effects, Civil Affairs Solutions, Civil Solutions International, Valcomir, Human Security, and Conductor. So what we're going to be doing today, centering on this idea of integrated deterrence, which, as we learned at the symposium, is about winning without fighting, civil military integration at interagency, interorganizational, and multinational levels. The other thing that we realize is how civil affairs is de facto a joint force of choice that wins without fighting. And given what's going on these days and strategic competition with the likes of Russia and China, including the proxy war that's going on in Ukraine, this particular capability, civil military capabilities, large, have become ever more important, not just for post-conflict, but also for combat operations, large-scale combat operations, anti-terrorism, irregular warfare, which of course continues in many different parts of the world, and in regular warfare is a large piece of what's going on in Ukraine. And so the idea of securing the victory is not just something that happens after. Securing the victory happens before, during, and after major battles. This in turn implies, more than implies, I would say, that we've got to start thinking about civil affairs as a maneuver force in its own right in the human dimension. And in that 3D model that shown in FM 3-0, the FM 3-0. Civil affairs maneuvers and all of those sort of moral space. So today we've got a really great lineup to discuss that. We're going to hear a lot from the policy level, and then there'll be an opportunity to reflect on that, as usual, representatives from the different civil affairs component command at the institutional level. So we've got the policy level and the institutional level. Our military keynote speaker is somebody that we've been trying to get to appear. So it's really exciting that we have Assistant Secretary of Defense Maier, Special Operations Low Intensity Conflict. And he'll be facilitated by none other than Major General Johnson, who is, of course, the commanding general. And then we have the outstanding panel that's going to comment a lot on that and talk about, the sort of the .no PFP way forward institution to operationalize, I think, a lot of those policy guidelines with regard to integrated deterrence. And there's just one note I need to make, that unfortunately Colonel Liddick from the PKSOI is overseas, and we're unable to have someone represent on the panel, although there will be a couple of staff of PKSOI to join us and offer a comment. The afternoon program, and there's a separate link, by the way, for the afternoon.
Okay.
You gotta log in for that. Starts at 12:30. We have the editorial team, Warrior Diplomats, brand new book that Colonel David and Crawley and Sergeant Costa, who edited this. I had the great privilege and honor of being among the authors. There are quite a few of them here today. And then we have our civilian keynote speaker, Secretary Witkowski, who's a great friend of civil affairs. Some of you who go back to the days of the civil affairs symposium in San Antonio, I think it was back in 2018, was among our keynote speakers. I think it was Major General. Anyway, so integrated deterrence, irregular warfare, civil warfare, cyber warfare. The discussion there is from two highly distinguished academic, civil affairs academics, one of which has been with us for a long time, Dr. Karen Maier from One Fiber Institute, which is posted now at this point, just down the river from behind me. I am. And Stanislava Malatinova, who also has appeared on 1CA podcast, and will still talk to us about the relationship between integrated deterrence, the integrated deterrence, irregular warfare, and civil affairs, and then we'll follow up discussion about integrated deterrence, cyber warfare, and civil affairs. And then, as we always do, to close out the annual discussion, we'll have an open discussion on the theme, what should be the theme of the next civil affairs issue papers. We issue the civil affairs issue paper, call for papers usually toward the end of May, beginning of June. So people have the whole summer to work on their papers, and then for the papers in the early to mid-September timeframe, papers later on. The papers are selected in symposium, which will be on the 14th and 15th of November. They are presented then and then published. And then our final announcements, opening announcements here from our new president, General Roosen, Army retired. Just a quick update on the issue papers. We had a bit of a transition this year to a new publication team at Niagara University, ROTC. So they are producing them. These have just been finished. Pending a final proof, we'll post the electronic version of the civil affairs papers, and you'll probably see an announcement on that later this week. And then the print copies will go out. And for those of you who want a print copy, you can send a message to the secretary at admin at civilaffairsassociation.org. We'll get a copy. Otherwise, you can look forward to civil affairs annual meeting that will have sometime this fall, pending the decisions of the president. And then we have seen this in the crawl, new book, Warrior Diplomats, as I mentioned, published. It's gotten quite a bit of great feedback already. And if you go to Cambria Press, there's a 20% discount. Save 20 to order the book there. So that share, and so without any further ado, what I'm going to do right now is to transition over to our new president, General Hugh Van Roosen. But first, what I'd like to do is to acknowledge the leadership of our outgoing president, Colonel retired Joe Carlin, president of the Civil Affairs Association for a little over a decade, and a great period of time of change and growth in the association, the role of the association as professional and force development organization of civil affairs, kind of move the enterprise forward over the years, and there's an awful lot of great things, including this program, including the issue papers, including one CA podcast, great books that Colonel David, others have produced that have helped to really kind of get us on the map in terms of intellectual capitalization of civil affairs, and particularly to mainstream the discussion of civil affairs in the larger discussion of the future of the Army, the future of the Marines, and the future of the Joint Force and our strategic capabilities, which continues with our new relationship with institutions. So it's a really exciting time. Those of you who are looking for making an impact on this process, consider joining the Civil Affairs Association, or becoming a director in the Civil Affairs Association, and moving the enterprise forward. As I said, this is my 10th year of doing this, and looking forward to transitioning over to new leadership here. Very, very honored to introduce General Van Roosen. I have crossed paths on years and many different points, to include the change of command in the waiting tent in Iraq, in the 402nd Civil Affairs Battalion, after the first year of the war. And he was also appeared likewise in places like Liberia. He was also served in the United Nations field meetings, and has the great distinctive honor of being the second highest military officer in the United States, New York. So very important background to have. We continue to expand on this idea of building a global civil military network, and growing our ability to win new partners, and friends and foes, and committed alike, friends of Center. Very, very important capability we're learning in the competition. Really our ability to have allies and partners with us, working with them, that really gives us a decisive advantage. So without any further ado, I turn it over to Roosen. You have the
Chris, thank you so much for introduction. As always, it's a great pleasure to take an opportunity to welcome the various friends of civil affairs in the regiment. I see we have over 100 participants today, which speaks very well for the interest in civil affairs as a topic. So I'd also like to extend my sincere thanks to the organizer of this roundtable, and to our partners, as you have mentioned, and sponsors to make this possible. We're very fortunate today, just to lend depth and scope to our discussions, to have two keynote speakers, as you've mentioned, that are particularly notable. Mr. Christopher Maier, Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Special Operations Low Intensity Conflict at Department of Defense, as well as Ms. Ann Witowski, an old friend, Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations at the Department of State. So the purpose of today's roundtable is to address three major observations that came out of the 2022 Civil Affairs Symposium, the interim report from that. And those are integrating deterrence from the national security strategy and how to tie civil affairs most effectively into that part of the national security strategy. Second is using civil affairs to win without fighting, again, in support of the national security strategy. And then thirdly, how to foster particularly amongst our military, a better understanding of civil affairs as a maneuver force rather than just as a enabler or multiplier. So, that's what we are going to be talking about today. We're delighted to have our keynote speakers and the various sessions that Chris laid out earlier. But at the end of this, we want to take from this some lessons, some observations, from some recommendations, and use that to guide where we're going in the future, not only as a regiment, but also for the Civil Affairs Association. This, as Chris mentioned, is an opportunity for us to sort of rethink where we're going in the future and take our observations today to help us guide that process. I'm delighted to have the opportunity this is my first chance to speak in front of the Civil Affairs Association membership and friends and colleagues. So I'm really happy to step into this new position. And with that, I'd like to turn over to Major General Isaac Johnson, our commanding general from the Civil Affairs and Psychological Operations Command at Fort Bragg, just around the corner from where I am, to be able to introduce our first keynote speaker. General Johnson, thank you so much for joining today. I see you've got a wonderful background. It doesn't look like Fort Bragg, though.
No, it's not Fort Bragg, but it's Fort Houston today.
Thank you very much, General. Over to you.
All right, thank you. Thanks, General Roosen. It's a pleasure to see you. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and distinguished guest, and clearly to the leadership of the Civil Affairs Association. I'm honored to be here today and to welcome all of you to this roundtable event. I'm going to share a couple of words here, and then we're going to try to move quickly into some questions for our distinguished guests, but just a couple of opening comments to set the stage. And so as the world is continuously changing and becoming more competitive and contested, the resurgence of the great power competition coupled with amazing technologies have created an environment that echoes Cold War time frames, yet uniquely different. The United States continues to avoid Tholesian, Thucydides, trap. And so, I studied there. I stopped there for a second because I remember some of us may remember that from War College or some of those old reasons from CGSC. So anyway, please look that up again, that trap that we're trying to avoid with China while simultaneously supporting our partners and allies as we wrestle with an increasingly malign Russia. In pursuing this path, the 2022 National Defense Strategy established 4 priorities for the Department of Defense to seek to compete, defend our national interests. The 4 priorities are defending the homeland, paced with the growing multi-domain threat posed by the People's Republic of China, of course, deterring strategic attacks against the United States, allies, and our partners, deterring aggression while being prepared to prevail in a conflict when necessary, polarizing the PRC challenge in the Indo-Pacific, then the Russia challenge in Europe, and building a resilient joint force and a defense ecosystem. To better understand what that means for the civil affairs lanes, we have asked the Honorable Chris Maier, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations in Low Intensity Conflict, or SOLIC, to share his thoughts on how the department is adapting those to these challenges and the impact on today's force and the shaping of the future force. Mr. Maier is a seasoned national security professional with a wealth of experience in defense policy and strategy. As the Assistant Secretary of Defense, he oversees the Department of Defense efforts to counter emerging threats and ensure national security in an ever-evolving global landscape. Mr. Maier is widely recognized for his expertise in special operations and low-intensity conflict, having served in various leadership roles within the Department of Defense. Before taking this position, Mr. Maier served several positions at the National Counterterrorist Center, including Special Advisor to the Director, Chief of Strategic Assessments and Regional Planning, and Chief of Staff in the Directorate of Strategic Operations Planning. Throughout his distinguished career, Mr. Maier has made significant contributions to the national security of the United States, including leading the Department of Defense efforts to counter the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria and Al-Qaeda, and strengthening U.S. relationships with partners and allies. Mr. Maier's extensive experience in national security and his deep understanding of the challenges we face make him a very valuable and valuable contributor to today's discussion. His expertise in special operations and low intensity conflict will provide valuable insights to our discussion on civil affairs. And just to close out here, I encourage all of our stakeholders today to engage with our experts and contribute to the conversation. This is an opportunity for all of us to learn more about each other and work together to advance our national security interests. So with that, without further ado, please join me in joining Honorable Christopher P. Maier. All right. I would ask everybody to come off on mute, but I'm afraid trying to get everybody back on mute may be an issue. So we're not gonna ask that. So Honorable Maier, are you on with us? I think you're on mute. Uh-oh. I think we're still on mute. Do we can we see if there's a double mute on there? Please stand by, sir.
The ASD is not yet ready, sir. We're just we'll be here in just a minute.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Good to go. Yes. Wait, give him a second. He's still 7 out. He's prepping.
Okay, maybe I should have read that introduction a little bit slower, but I'll go on.
Johnson, this is Chris Holshek. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing fine. I'm doing hyped up on coffee, but doing
Yeah,
well.
I get you. Hey, look, if we've got a couple minutes here, maybe if you would be open to this, we could entertain a couple of questions from the floor and take the opportunity for some of our guests to just have a quick chat with you.
Oh, sure. Hey, I'm all in. And I think I have my team for just in case I need a lifeline on too. So let's go. Well, let's see. Okay, any updates on the 38 golf program? So generally, the program is doing well. Clearly, we can always, always do better in our recruitment. And I'm trying to think, the last slate that we had, I think was one of the largest slates of that we had to come through as far as slate of officers or candidates, was one of the largest that we've had. So we continue to increase. One thing I'm really proud about is we've signed, and I forget the number, but we've signed several agreements with different universities throughout the United States as far as reach back for those capabilities when our 38 golfs are downfield, and for that matter, 38 alphas or in our PSYOPers. So wonderful programs that we've established to support the 38 golfs when they're downfield with reach back expertise from a who's who of premier universities. So again, we can always do better, but the program is continuing to grow.
Hey, Isaac, good morning. Chris Stockwell here. Hey, great to see you. Hey, how's and I know the structure guys will probably talk about this more, but from a KPOC standpoint, how is the FDU making its way through big Army, especially as it relates to the MTO or TDA of various units, especially the MTO for KCOM? Thank you.
All right, hey, thank you. And I make for one of my teammates that may want to come on, Colonel Arndt, or they want to give more details. But I would tell you that I don't know exactly what gateway, what threshold it is right now, Chris. But I will tell you, we provided all our comments, and almost upwards to 90, greater than 90% of our comments were taken. There was a little issue around some of the law of some of the lawyers that we had in the formations that were going to come out, but they're back in. So I'm feeling really good, and it's back to that 38 golf that we're going to be really having to fill the ranks with many 38 golfs. But I'm excited how we've been able to somewhat right size the formations and the just additional capabilities that we're going to be able to bring from not only CA, but our PSYOP brother and IO that's going to be joining some of the formations.
Hey,
I'll
sir.
pause. Go ahead.
Hey, sir. This is Colonel Sisk with the CA Capabilities Manager's Office up at the USOC.
Oh,
The FDU is cleared CAC and is now up in Department of Army for staffing. On the line, we also have Dr. Dale Walsh if anybody requires or needs any further information regarding that. Over.
Thank you. And I want to say thank y'all for participating and supporting us at our recent commanders conference that we had, I think about a month ago now. And I will take this opportunity to share. I'm so excited about the partnerships that we've had there with the adjacent units at Fort Bragg, soon to be Camp Liberty, or Fort Liberty, sorry. And so the relationship between SWIC, it's stronger than ever. The relationship clearly with Special Operations Command is strong, and being able to have touch points with General Donahue there at 18 Airborne Corps. So and even 82nd. I mean, as you know, we've kind of re-energized our airborne capabilities again, and now our jump masters are serving on as jump masters for at the 82nd, and their jump masters are serving over at USA KPOC, and so really excited about some of that interoperability there. I'll pause and stop talking about airborne and see what else we got.
You have two questions in the chat room there, sir. One on the Global Fragility Act and the other on the national security and national defense.
I'm sorry, I'm on mute here. I'm going to punt on one of these because I don't want to mislead or get ahead of my skis on the implementation of the Global Fragility Act. So that's a due out for me. Back to Chris. I'll send it back to you as far as a written statement. And the next one here is system.
Another one just popped up on, sir, since the last event, industry and legislation is taking action against TikTok, raising their risk perception mitigation. Perhaps what are the additional things the general audience should be aware of? Not sure if that's in your lane, but
beyond my scope. So
yeah, it's a little beyond your pay grade.
Hey, sir, this is Colonel Sue Gannon. I actually can jump in on the GFA a little bit from the 360th perspective. So our teams in West Africa are actually partnering with the 91st CA Battalion, the active component, through the Civil Affairs, Science and Technology, Learning and Ecosystem. And I think I saw Dr. St. Benoit on the line today, doing some work in the GFA in Ghana. So more to follow. It's in its nascent stages, but there is definitely spreading some knowledge across the force and really looking at it, especially since 7 of the 9 countries are on the African continent. So 360th is definitely taking a look at that. And I think that is going to continue to evolve as we go forward. Over.
Let me jump in on that as well. I mean, there's some interesting, from a policy perspective, there's some interesting aspects to look at when you're talking about social media and its impact on the future of civil affairs as well as psychological operations. There's the whole mis and disinformation aspect of that, and how much of that, belongs in cyber versus potentially in PSYOP or information operations. So I know that that's being considered right now, but I'd love to learn more about that and how that is tying back into the doctrine for civil affairs in particular. There's a whole technology side that I don't think is currently in the doctrine very deeply, but probably needs to be in the future, not the least of which, is things like artificial intelligence and machine learning. Well, I'll stop there because I think the Honorable Chris Maier has joined us.
Hello, Honorable Mayor. This is Major General Johnson over here, and I promise you I gave a very distinguished welcoming to you before you came on. But if you have any opening comments, please do, or otherwise, I know your time is constrained, and we'll jump right into questions and answers. So. Sorry, sir. I'm
Still on mute, sir. No, I'm still on mute. Oh, there we go.
I think it's a double mute out there. Just had this earlier. Could we double check to make sure that there's not a double mute out there, teammates?
So there's not, it's on that end, somewhere they're muted on their side.
We had his office up just 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, I think, Mr. Mayor, I think that's at your end on your computer. It's not actually in Zoom. Yeah, so we're showing you as unmuted right now on the software.
Any luck now?
That's good. You're on.
Okay. Sorry about that, and appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all. Sorry about the mute issues, as we're unfortunately still meeting by Zoom, but that's probably is good for you all and your distributed way that more people can join. So great opportunity to speak with you all today and hear your questions, and I hope we'll have a good discussion. So I'm more than willing to start when you are, Major General Johnson.
Okay, hey, well, thank you, sir. Thank you again for giving us your time today in insights. So I'll jump right into a couple of questions here, and so the Civil Affairs Association Symposium generally has a wide range of participants from all ranks from across active and reserve component, Marine Corps, Army, who may not be as familiar with this level of DoD leadership and how it translates into civil affairs. So two-part question. I am an attorney by trade long time ago, so I have these long questions. So can you please offer some insight as to what roles and responsibility as Assistant Secretary of Defense Solik are to provide our listeners a greater context of CAA at the higher levels? And next question, and what is currently underway for policy perspective with regards to joint civil affairs capability? Over.
Yeah, both good questions. And if anybody's confused, even after I explain this, don't worry. There's many people in the department that don't understand the unique role of Solik. I think somebody might have a live mic out there, by the way. So we really have two hats within special operations and low intensity conflict. And some of this is relatively new based on congressional legislation. But we've long had responsibility in the policy environment here in the department, supporting the secretary with all the issues that relate to special operations, but also elements that have long been referred to as low intensity conflicts. So those are things like stabilization, civil affairs fits in there, what we call irregular warfare now, counterterrorism, a whole host of issues that are really below that level of armed conflict, below that threshold of armed conflict. But in the last about 5-6 years, Congress has empowered the role of that I am in to also have service secretary-like oversight for the organized, train, and equip of all special operations forces. So while it's not a perfect parallel, the best way to think about it is the Army, Navy, and Air Force have roles over those forces in the service capacities. And so I have a similar responsibility, as does my team, for the special operations enterprise, US SOCOM, but also obviously the components that fall under it. So we have two hats for the policy role. I report up through the Undersecretary for Policy, who is the primary policy advisor to the Secretary of Defense. And for the service role, I report directly to the Secretary of Defense for all special operations, peculiar administrative activities. So what that means in practice is the organized, train, and equip piece, not in the chain of command for operations, but in the chain of command for administrative issues. And means I do things like approve the special operations budget at about $14 billion a year. And so have that responsibility. So really I live in two worlds. I live in the service world, and I live also in the OSD policy world. As to what that means for civil affairs, I think is multiple things really. As we look from a policy perspective of what types of capabilities and tools we need for those types of activities below the threshold of armed conflict, civil affairs looms large in that. And so in our policy hat, we spend a lot of time working to ensure that civil affairs is integrated into a series of other capabilities, communities, and frankly, branches when we're talking Army and Marine Corps, into the overall way that we're approaching different problem sets, whether it's in the traditional stabilization spaces. I heard somebody previously mentioning Global Fragility Act. That's a key focus. But also as we increasingly focus under the National Defense Strategy on the pacing challenge of the PRC and also the acute threat of Russia. Obviously, Iran and North Korea are still high on the list, as is counterterrorism. But then separately on the organized, train, and equip side, with civil affairs still having deep relationships with the SOF enterprise, whether it's formally through the active duty component or maybe more informally through the reserve component, we have a significant role in determining where priorities are for training, for resourcing, and in many respects evolving the integration of civil affairs into other aspects of those elements of the special operations community, but also those key enablers of the special operations community, logistics, intelligence, others that we know are reliant, or we are reliant on from a SOF enterprise to be successful. So there's a number of touch points across the purview of the Solic enterprise that touch on civil affairs, depend on civil affairs, and are, I think, tightly integrated with civil affairs. Back over to you, sir.
Thank you for that detailed response. And I was taking notes here. I tell you what stood out to me was that 14 billion number. So when we talk, okay, we're always talking budget over here. But so let me follow up with a couple of questions. Again, another kind of two-part question to try to cover some ground here, related to the National Defense Strategy and DoD strategic priorities. The direction of the department and how it translates to advance the joint civil affairs capability. So the questions are, the NDS was just published in 2022. Can you offer us some insights from a civil affairs perspective about how we can learn or glean from the strategy or other department strategic priorities, where we should focus the joint civil affairs capabilities? it's kind of a long question, that first one, but the second one is, given the department's refocus on integrated deterrence and prioritization of COIN, what are the implications to civil affairs in terms of prioritizing missions and capabilities? And you touched on that some about some interoperability and capability in your previous answer, but if you wouldn't mind unpacking a couple of those.
Sure. So on the first question on the NDS, I think our Secretary Austin likes to say that's the North Star of the department. And it really is. Of my years in the department and elsewhere in government, this is the most integrated implementation of a strategy that I have seen. So, first off, to give you a flavor of this, the Secretary routinely hosts combatant commanders, service chiefs, and others to really help drive implementation, both give guidance, but also hear from them what they're doing. So if you're thinking of where to start in understanding where the department's going, the NDS is a very sound place to devote a little bit of time. The major elements of this, beyond what I already mentioned of China as the pacing challenge and really that longer term effort that we are focused on, and Russia as the acute threat, is also North Korea and Iran and counterterrorism round out kind of the threat actors. But we've articulated for ourselves a handful of key ways we're going to go about getting after those challenges. One of these is campaigning. So this has been an intentional effort to not characterize what we're doing as competing, which has sort of a never-ending element to it, but campaigning is really meant to talk about using all the tools at our disposal and linking these together to achieve the effects we want. So this could be taking ongoing exercises, it could be engagements we're having with partners, it could be capabilities we're rolling out or demonstrating, and knitting those together in a way that's more thoughtful for the effects we want to achieve. Some of those effects are demonstrating our own capabilities. Some of those effects are demonstrating to the PRC or Russia that we can hold their capabilities at risk. Some of these are to really demonstrate to our allies and partners how we're evolving and how we need them to evolve with us and mature with us. And to your question of where civil affairs, I think, has a distinct role to play in this, deep history of working with allies and partners is really essential and really central to the NDS. So you all have a frame of partnership that is in many respects broader than the rest of the U.S. military at times, especially as you think of not only the interagency elements across the U.S. government, but civil society partners, non-governmental organizations, in some cases even the private sector. And I think the challenge for such a broad set of partners and allies is how this is done in a thoughtful, synchronized, deliberate manner, not in just ad hoc ways that, while important, don't amount to the sum of their individual parts. So in many respects, I think civil affairs is a leader on really drawing in and being able to harness the capabilities of lots of other elements that are generally aligned with us, but might not even be part of our government, might not even be in the military. And you all have demonstrated that over decades. I think the challenge will be continuing to do that, but in a way that is, in some respects, above the tactical level and isn't going to be in the context of an Afghanistan or Iraq, but in a persistent allies and partners approach. I think some of the elements that still ring true are, things like one of the examples in talking to the team beforehand, some of the work that continues in Northeast Syria, where we get a huge bang for our buck from my experience, having worked those issues from civil affairs, of being able to bring key community partners in as we continue our de-ISIS campaign, but also realizing there that much of what we do is provide dilemmas for the Russians, for the Iranians, for others that are attempting to influence the local populations. I also think there's a huge role for civil affairs as we think about supporting other broader U.S. government initiatives, whether it's in the humanitarian space or the stabilization space. And 92nd Civil Affairs Battalion's work for quite some time at this point in Ukraine and the ability to continue to support from across the border in Poland, I think is a huge return on investment from our perspective, not only having built the relationship with the Ukrainians, but then when the decision was made to remove US military from Ukraine, still being able to maintain those relationships and support those partners in some of the more challenging, combat situations where we are supporting but not part of that conflict. And the last part probably that applies to a lot of us on the military side is how we maintain that persistent, sustained access and placement to our partners. And in those locations where we know even a handful of US military goes a long way to reassuring the partners that we are there and present and are going to continue to be closely partnered with them. One of the fundamental elements that the NDS takes as an assumption is that we are the partner of choice, and we are the element that brings more value than our competitors. And I think that has played out in large measure and very obviously in Ukraine, where we've seen a huge number of allies and partners align against Russia, and Russia stuck with, maybe Belarus and maybe North Korea. The jury is still a little out on the PRC, but that's a relatively small number that can be counted on one hand compared to you need lots of people's fingers and toes to count the number of partners we have and the Ukrainians have in that fight. And I think that really goes to the idea that civil affairs being present in so many different places and working across those different partnerships, not always just mill, but across a lot of the civilian and in some cases, of course, even to elements that are not even in the formal governmental structure. So whether those NGOs or IGOs or other places like that, whether that's in a training context, whether that's an exercise context, whether that's working out of embassy, I think these are key aspects where in many respects the DNA of civil affairs is tailor-made to help on that part of the NDS. As to the second question on our evolution away from coin, I think this probably is going to present some challenges to how we actually apply civil affairs capabilities in the field. So yes, we will continue to do counterterrorism. It just won't be as much of a focus. And yes, from the soft perspective, crisis response and things like that will continue to be core areas. But I think as we talk about this idea of campaigning and integrated deterrence, another key pillar, integrated deterrence really gets at all aspects of what we can bring as a nation with our allies and partners to, as mentioned earlier, create some dilemmas for our adversaries, but also reassure our partners. In some cases, deterrence means the resilience of our partners to resist some of the malign activities. That could be in the information space, that could be in the economic space, that could be in maybe even the civilian or humanitarian space. Here, I think civil affairs has a very important role to play in supporting combatant commanders in both being able to see how the effects of maybe PRC or Russian influence on societies is playing out, and where there may be opportunities for us to, with very little investment, attrit those or at least expose those to the host governments. And I think as mentioned earlier, the Global Fragility Act, which we are the lead for in the department, is an area like that where, while that's a much larger enterprise that brings in other aspects of U.S. government, we think this supports the NDS because it's really looking to get ahead of areas that are headed for crisis, but before they actually are those crisis situations where you're often forced to rely on military or security aspects that are far outsized from the civilian elements that we would rather be using those tools from USAID, State Department, Department of Commerce, and others. So this is an area where I think civil affairs can really be helpful in helping many of our military commanders and our civilian leaders to understand where the society is potentially being stressed by some of the malign activities of China or Russia and their what tends to be much more transactional and exploitative activities. So probably a whole host of other things that we can talk about in this context, but those would be the ones that I would highlight in response to your questions. Back to you, General Johnson.
Hey, thank you, sir. A couple things in there that caught my attention. One is I'll start with the statement that in use of KPOC, we often share with our units that our customers are the combatant commanders and ASCCs that are out there. So we always try to keep that in mind to make sure we remain engaged and relevant to support the fight. And I say to support the fight, but I heard something. Is there a slight change in terms from competing to campaigning, from competition to campaigning, to more aligned with COCOM, with combatant commanders' campaign plans? I just want to unpack that if that is a change. Or
It is. I think the 2018 National Defense Strategy really started wholesale this pivot to the PRC and Russia, or great powers, so to speak, or peer adversaries, however you want to term those, has been further, I think, refined in the 2022 NDS, and been much more front and center, that competing just for itself is not the ends we achieve. Really, it's hard to ever measure that. And it potentially dilutes the capabilities if you're trying to compete everywhere in the world, that there might be a potential competitor trying to achieve. And so the two twin aspects of there's actually three, but the two twin aspects that play out in the NDS is really campaigning this idea towards achieving certain effects in deliberate areas we have chosen. So part of that is the NDS clearly defines the Indo-Pacific region as the area of primary focus. Yes, we will do this in other areas around the world, but that's where we want to achieve these effects. And the campaigning approach is meant to really talk about layering effects, putting these things together towards specific priority ends, as opposed to just trying to compete everywhere. The second piece is integrated deterrence, which really builds on the idea that we bring a lot of capability, especially if you start thinking about this beyond just the military frame and integrating allies and partners, but with an idea that integrating all this towards certain deterrent effects, where we want to be able to hold the adversaries really at bay from being able to accomplish their objectives as we accomplished ours. The third piece that doesn't play out as much in kind of the policy operational space, but really speaks to the organize, train, and equip, is building enduring advantage. So we want to be investing in those areas where it'll help us to campaign better, where it'll help to establish some of those deterrent effects. And it's more in the kind of that down and in, that service piece, but it also speaks to the organized, train, and equip component. And ultimately, as mentioned earlier, when the SecDef gets together to talk about implementation of the NDS, it's the services and the combatant commands, they're the primary doers. So to your question, yes, all of this is meant to be in support of combatant commander campaigning and the services, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Space Force, Coast Guard, etc. I think I got all of them. That are we would think of the soft enterprise as part of that too. Very much in support of the combatant commanders, presenting those forces, doing the organizing, training, and equip to really advance the combatant commanders, regional and functionals, focus on campaigning for effect. Over.
Sir, thank you for unpacking that for us. And as we close out here, this was one closing question here, and you've already touched on this throughout many of the conversation, and that is, can you offer any parting thoughts or recommendation as we look forward to advance the joint civil affairs capabilities for increasingly competing in a competitive world? And you've already touched on many of that, but any closing comments on that, sir?
So I think a key point I probably should have mentioned at the beginning is we're fully embarked from our office here on establishing a updated civil affairs directive. So it's integrated into a whole series of different initiatives that are underway, including already mentioned the Global Fragility Act has prompted a U.S. strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability across the world. That's resulted in 10-year plans that recently were pushed from the White House to Congress. That's one thing. we are actively involved in implementing the Secretary's Civilian Harm Mitigation Response Action Plan, which has as a key element of it a greater understanding for combatant commanders of the civil society they're working in, the civilian infrastructure. This is tailor-made for bringing civil affairs capabilities to advise commanders as they're looking at the whole enterprise of their repertoire of capabilities, but applying that to a particular problem set, which of course in many respects will have civilians integrated as part of what they're looking at. So said probably a little bit more cleanly, as we do mission planning at a strategic level, part of what we're banking on bringing into civilian harm mitigation and response is a greater understanding of not only where civilians are, but how they survive, how they thrive, and making sure that we're taking those underlying and undergirding elements of society into play. That's another key area. And then maybe most importantly, as we look at how we talk about things like irregular warfare, which is often defined more in what it's made up of as opposed to a specific definition. So if you think of our low intensity conflict moniker in SOLIC, it's really how we bring in things like foreign internal defense, stabilization, counterterrorism, understanding of the society aspects. This is an area where I think civil affairs needs to be very deliberately integrated. And so I am a co-chair of an executive group we run with our J7 here on the Joint Staff that is attempting to really build out how we think as a department from a doctrine perspective on irregular warfare. Civil affairs is a key part of that. And I think lastly, civil affairs is something that has so many links in so many different areas. At times we run the risk of it being sort of lost in how diffuse it can be. Making sure that we have a clear focus and a continued focus on that as we have stood up a policy working group that works across a lot of different components, a lot of different stakeholders to ensure that we're evolving the civil affairs enterprise, at least from a strategy, policy, and doctrine perspective, in a way that tracks with the national defense strategy and some of these other supporting strategies that I mentioned. So that may sound a little bit bureaucratic, but at the end of the day, if you're not at the table for these big strategic discussions, it means that when resources come around, when allocation of forces are worked through, you're not considered as part of that mix. So it's very important, I think, that CA has not only an advocate for these, but is actually bringing forth its value proposition in these settings amongst combatant commanders, amongst OSD components, amongst the services. So that's kind of the journey we're embarked on, and hopefully that is helpful to you and everybody else listening here, and kind of giving you a sense of how we're looking to evolve the civil affairs capabilities in conjunction with some of the other strategic moves and evolutions here in the department. Back over to you.
Sir, well, thank you for that insight, and thank you for helping us with our equities and being a voice at the table to remain relevant. And so that ends the, I guess, the more formal session here as far as Q&A, and I think we may have a little time here for a question and answer session if you're still available. I'm looking at the time here. Okay. So Chris, would you like to facilitate the Q&A, or would you like me to pick it up?
No, sir, I think you can go forward with this.
Okay, so we have, sir, we have a couple of questions in the chat here, and I will pick out a couple here for your consideration. So I'll try to read these off here. So could you please talk a bit about the forward presence of reserve component, conventional, as well as active duty soft CA as a function of strategy and operational readiness and development of positional advantages that comes from building relationships network, especially 38 Golf program, as you know, that we've been growing. I'll pause there.
So it's a very good question. I think it gets to the intersection between where civil affairs and key elements of the national defense strategy come together. So my hope and expectation certainly is that whether it's a reservist doing their reserve time in either forward or back here in CONUS, thinking about how and perfecting their ability to work with partners, or in the active component, really fundamental, I think, here is those persistent relationships and understanding on the part of our partners, where civil affairs is really, in some respects, a portal to the rest of the capabilities of not only DoD, but also to some of our key partners and allies. And I know you're having some other folks from around the community that are not civil affairs people, including Ann Witowski and others, talk to you. And I think being that pathfinder with partners to really be able to unlock some of that capability in the various engagements that, reservists obviously less frequently, perhaps just because of days and man days, and active duty maybe more frequently. But it's also, I think, incumbent on not only us here in the Pentagon, but you all and some of our, non-civil affairs components, to make sure that we're bringing some of that civil affairs capability into the conversations, into the planning, and ultimately into the operational and execution of, whether it's exercises, whether it's engagements, whether it's key leader engagements, these kind of issues. So probably a general response to a very broad question, but I think even the question gets at the key points of, relationships is really where we're going to win and lose in many respects, because our adversaries don't have nearly the depth or the richness that we do.
Well, thank you for that follow-up. And I shared with our teammates on earlier that the relationships between USA CAPOC and USA SOC with General Braga there, and of course with General Donahue, the relationships have been very deep, and we're looking at ways to continue to train together and push interoperability as we support the national defense strategy. So I have another question here. I'm going to ask this next person to come off mute and ask the questions. Dr. Dale Walsh. So if you wouldn't mind coming off.
Yes, sir. Good morning, sir. So my question is, in 2009, the current DepSecDef and current SecArmy co-authored a CSIS study on the future of civil affairs forces. Their number one recommended corrective action was to reintegrate all Army CA forces under US SOCOM. So as we posture the force to meet the NDS objectives, Army 2030 and 2040 objectives, prevail in competition and win without fighting, what do you see as the degree of probability of redesignating all Army CA forces as special operations forces, and then the subsequent reassignment to US SOCOM and USASOC?
I'll just tell you, I'm not going to give you a probability on that, but I think it's a very fair question. And I also recall that report in part because of who wrote it. It's still, I think, relevant even 14 years on. So truth in lending, I think this is part of a broader conversation, but I don't know that there's an imminent decision whether it be on the Army side, and I'm not in a position to speak for Secretary of the Army on this particular issue. From the SOCOM perspective, I think we look to integrate as much as possible the active component into the ongoing SOF enterprise. But mentioned earlier, just short right before this, talked to both General Donahue and General Braga about how we bring the reserve component more into the routine interoperability, whether it's training, whether it's ensuring that the capabilities that are being developed are consistent with where they think their force is going to have to go. And I think if you've got USASOC and 18th Airborne Corps integrating as much as possible civil affairs, you're doing pretty well. So I think this is going to be a question that will continue to be with us, but I'm not at this point sure that there will be a relook at reversing the decision from the early 2000s to integrate the two, but I know this is a point of discussion as we stand here today. So it's a little bit of a non-answer, but recognizing that in the interim, the real trick is going to be to, as much as possible, integrate across civil affairs component, active and reserve, despite the different reporting chains. And I think maybe more importantly, ensure both are integrated with the overall objectives of the combatant commanders and those force providers like USASOC and 18th Airborne Corps. Over. I think you might be muted.
Sir, I said I wanted to go on the record to say I didn't ask that question. That's why I wanted to kick it over to Dr. Ross. So anyway, it just one more question here, and we have a couple here. So Newsom, would you mind coming off mute and asking the question? We might have touched on some of that, but would you mind coming off? Okay.
Great. Thank you, sir. Thanks for being here, and thanks for the acknowledging the strength of the reservists mobilizing America, which can then mobilize also a lot of international trusted partners. That's outstanding. Appreciate that. The question is I think there's this squeaky ground between State Department and the U.S. military, especially when it comes to non-kinetic warfare. China's doing it really well. What are your thoughts on how we get our hands around non-kinetic warfare? Any thoughts on how we tackle that, sir?
I think it's a really important question, and I think it's where there's a tremendous amount of investment. General Johnson, for you and your other hat, we're in my experience of 2.5 decades in government, most of it working on things like information operations issues, PSYOPs, MISO. This is the first time where there's actually been a significant amount of senior investment in a day-to-day look at that particular series of disciplines. So I think as we talk about it just in the military context, whether it's military deception, military information support operations, public affairs, and then looking at that across the US government, whether it's the State Department's capabilities in public diplomacy or the ability that I think has been played out quite well in Ukraine to have the White House be the spokesperson to expose some of the Russian activity. That is an area that has gotten a lot more attention, as one might expect when you're talking about integrated deterrence. Information is a key element that needs to be integrated into that. And then I think in some of the other areas, we're really looking for areas like stabilization and really the capacity building that is best done by USAID or the State Department to actually be done in a thoughtful way, back to my earlier comments, where we think that societies are at risk and potentially open to exploitation or extraction from the PRC, from Russia, Wagner Group, and others. And I think one of the things that, even though it is a probably pretty basic concept of integrated deterrence, it's really focused on, in the first order, figuring out how we can pull more layering of capabilities towards those deterrent effects. And that shouldn't stop at the Department of Defense. And I think the NDS has been quite instrumental in focusing not only how we do business in DoD, but also having some of our other sister departments, State Department, AID, but even other places like Commerce and Treasury, to fall in some cases where DoD has established a security presence, but in many cases, we're in the supporting role to those agencies as they're attempting to accomplish some of these effects to the non-kinetic ideas that I think your questioner asked about. I mean, we've been doing this for a long time, but we've often masqueraded the DoD activities as being supporting when in reality they were the main efforts. And I think we're looking to, in many cases, rebalance those, especially in the Asia Pacific, where there just isn't going to be a large military footprint, and we're going to have to do many of these things through more soft power. This is where I think civil affairs is particularly well situated to work across that divide, speak, sort of the warrior ethos, but at the same time can speak stabilization, can speak civil society, can speak private sector, where isn't always the core competency of some of our fellow DoD colleagues, whether uniform or civilian. Over.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you. A great question. So, sir, we're running right up at time here, and I think you gave a couple of closing remarks earlier, but wanted to yield to you for any closing remarks. And before that, I wanted to definitely thank you again for spending your time with us and giving us a deep dive. I know I learned something new today, and I took a keen note here about competition versus campaigning. So I look forward to having those communications down and in the force as we start talking that language. I'll pause there for any closing thoughts you have.
I appreciate the opportunity and I appreciate the questions. Maybe just a couple parting thoughts to leave you with. One of the aspects of this concept of campaigning and integrated deterrence is really doing a lot of the investments to prevent conflict. So, we talk all the time about the PRC's goal of winning without fighting. I think in some respects, that's a fair way to describe what we're trying to do here as well. And so, for all the components of the Defense Department, it's really about thinking in that competition and pre-conflict phase of what we can do, whether it's building resilience with our allies and partners, whether it's being in the right place to show our capabilities. And so I think from the civil affairs community, which has long been the leader in thinking from a post-conflict perspective, I think that will still be relevant, but I think in some cases it's going to be an onus on this community to think farther left of bang, so to speak. So what kind of things can we do in support combatant commanders in laying the groundwork for us to have advantages well before an adversary decides they want to make it kinetic or they want to compete in a particularly aggressive way, by in some respects deterring them from doing so. So I think we do that through the power of our partnerships. We do that through the power of our examples and the power of our presence. And I think these are all key aspects that civil affairs is really purpose built for. And so I'd encourage all of you to think in that kind of strategic frame, understanding the effects will have to be applied in an operational capacity, but as whether you're reservist training or active duty sort of on a day-to-day basis, asking ourselves collectively, do we have the capability to be supportive of the combatant commander in really moving the problem left of launch or left of bang, so that we don't have to result to some of the kinetic tools that we know we will do very well in, but we hope that won't come to that. So that would be the kind of closing points that I would ask you all to think about. And I also learned from this exchange. So I thank you very much for some of the somewhat challenging questions, which was good because it gets my brain cells moving. And hopefully I was able to characterize some of our thinking here from not only Solic, but more broadly from the Department of Defense, that helps you as you spend the rest of this day really amongst your civil affairs community, figuring out how you're going to continue to evolve to meet some of these challenges. So General Johnson, back to you.
All right. Again, thank you, sir. Thank you for your time. And so I'm going to give you a round of applause. Thank you for your time. I'm not going to ask everybody to come off mute because we may not get everybody back on mute. So again, thank you for your time and have a great rest of your day.
You too. Good luck with the rest of the day's work. Thanks for having me out here.
Thank you. Thank you. General Van Roosen, back over to you or to Chris, either one.
Thanks, General. So actually, we're going to pass it back to Chris Holshek. We're slightly ahead of schedule right now. So Chris, back over to you.
Well, the first thing I wanted to do was to ask General Johnson if he would himself be available for a few minutes to just take a couple of questions on the floor as a result of this discussion. And then I'm going to give a war note to Dennis and his crew and see if they want to be able to come on maybe a couple of minutes earlier than they anticipated.
Sure, I'm standing by. So I thought, first of all, I will say that was very informative. Like I said, we've been using, at least I've been using competition in our conversation with our COCON commanders and TIOG and the POGs, POG commanders. So I really do want to shift that language to campaigning as we talk, just in conversation in conversations or with our troops. So standing by for any questions.
Well, sir, if I could, I'll take the floor. I didn't see a question here yet in the chat room, but if I could you kind of comment a little further on ASD Maier's? I think he embraces this idea of forward presence of CA forces of all kinds, not just the soft CA. We talked about the 92nd in Ukraine, but particularly use of KPOC and the 38 Gulf. We had a really good presentation, as you know, from you and from 38 Gulf program manager on this idea of how the 38 Gulfs can be used in a much different way than we had thought of them, back in the good old days of the Monuments Men. But this idea of readiness, strategic and operational readiness. Could you just comment on how that idea is growing and kind of getting integrated kind of on the .mil PFP side, and particularly how you guys are looking at it, from a force structuring perspective, from overseas deployments, reserve personnel, how you kind of trying to palm that, and see how we can increase this readiness factor, which in turn is we're not just getting ready for large scale combat operations. It's a different mindset, because you're actually winning without fighting by sending these people forward to grow and gain continued positional advantage against our adversaries, and to be able to win. Could you just kind of comment on that a little bit? I know you're very big on it.
Well, thanks, Chris. I'll try to unpack that a little bit and try to make some points and not ramble too much. First of all, I think it starts with, as Honorable Mayor just shared, with his engagement with General Donahue and General Braga. So our team has been talking with their teams, and personally, I've had office calls with them on how we can continue to integrate our forces to show up as to provide civil affairs capabilities or PSYOP capabilities or IO capabilities. So one, I think, is parts with a conversation to making sure that you're relevant in you're actually talking across Fort Bragg. It sounds simple, but I think it goes a long way for those office calls, and then start unpacking. And that includes SWIC too, with the SWIC commander, General Beaupere. So with that, I will start by proof of concept that for lack of a better word, is a major warfighter that's about to kick off at Fort Hood, and it's going to be spread throughout the United States. There's going to be a lot of presence in Fort Hood. There's going to be presence in Fort Bragg, and up in I can't think of what states up in the Midwest. But it's going to be a huge warfighter. And in there, General Braga has asked me to look at least specifically the civil affairs capabilities on how the 38 Sierras, what they're doing in the fight, and how that is transitioned over to a 38 Alpha. And so, as the active components came up with the 38 Sierras in a couple of years ago, and we opined on that, but the structure is what it is now, and I think it's critical that we learn how to not necessarily complain or fight against the structure that we have, but how we interact with one another as far as bringing those capabilities to the fight. So big warfighter, I'll be taking notes there. We have several folks here, I think commanders that will be participating or sending units there. So looking forward to that. And then from there, from lessons learned there, then clearly we're going to look at opportunities how we can take that and deploy that forward, and take the lessons learned there to have conversations of how we can structure and integrate going forward. The next point, when we talk about readiness and capabilities and actually doing work, there was a great question earlier, hot potato, about us potentially going back over to Special Operations Command. So the way I think about that is, under, as use of KPOC commander, I basically have two bosses that I'm trying to, I have one boss, General Dane, so the car, but we also have the combatant commanders that are out there that have a demand signal, and we also have ForceCom that is a demand signal. Clearly there's that conversation. We don't want to burn our readiness on doing real world missions. I don't align to that. I think we get out there to make relevant in real world missions. And the more we can do that and stay plugged in with the COCOM commanders and connecting with USASOC on what's their battle space, what's our battle space, and how we can bring those capabilities to the fight, I think are very important. So at the same time, we do have a bill to pay to send off to go to NTC rotations and JRTC rotations. It is what it is. But so we have those two hats, and we're going to continue to try to manage those demands to make sure that we're relevant in forward deploying our capabilities downrange. The last part, and then I'll close it off. So there's much demand for cyber, not cyber, but for IO, for PSYOP, and for CA. And so we're getting these requests from the commanders, from the COCOMs, I'd like to tell my staff, it kind of comes through, the request comes through looking like Frankenstein. And so we have to come through and we look at, okay, these are our capabilities, our doctrinal capabilities that we can bring to this. But I've been becoming more and more open to quote unquote those Frankenstein or requests or requests for forces that are coming, because it is pulling together capabilities that normally they're not in a formation now in our doctrine. Now that may change with the new force development that's going to be approved, but I think I'm a pragmatist when it comes to delivering capabilities to the fight that are demands that are on ground in theater. So those are three major things. I hope I didn't ramble too much, but just to give you some of my insight as use of KPOC command. Over.
Thank you, sir. That was really insightful and gives us a lot better understanding of how you see the role of use of KPOC in what ASD Maier called, campaigning and competing. This idea of CA being much more involved in the campaigning process, in those, especially in support of the GCCs and SCCs in the areas. And I think that there's an awful lot of money to be made, no doubt. And it's great to hear your perspectives on that. I don't know if Dennis, if you're ready right now, but if you're not, one of the things that we got a question here on the floor. If you maybe give it a little bit of a short treatment, but just give us your thoughts kind of going forward on how you're seeing as you look ahead at as the KPOC commander, which obviously includes CA, IO, and PSYOP, and this idea of, sort of influence and information warfare, the role of AI. I think this is a potential theme for a whole year to talk about how we integrate AI with particularly CA in things like civil reconnaissance, civil engagement, and particularly civil information management, that we can better use AI capabilities not only to help our commanders see and understand and engage and impact those civilian human dimension and civilian spaces, But at the same time, to have a better ability to support that information and influence, in general on the other side with our partners and brothers and sisters in IO and in IOP. And I think you, among any commander, I think would have a far better understanding of that integration than anyone else.
Well, Chris, I'm not sure about that. I far a greater understanding, and this is where I would have loved to have my DCG General Carter on, and I don't think she's on, to give some thoughts for this, because I know there's much conversations with the pod commanders in TIOC. So I won't be able to give much more insight. I think that's another due out that I may have to the team. But I'll pause there to see if anyone from the staff or if we have one of those commanders on it who would like to chime in over.
Okay, I don't think there's anyone out there, sir, but consider that a warno. We
Okay.
may at a future conference ask you, to talk about that more in depth, because I think this is a huge area of potential for civil affairs and how we're able to help win that fight. So, Dennis, are you ready to go?
Hey, Chris, 1 second. I've got to get one of my speakers online. I'll come back to you in a moment. Over.
Okay. Any parting comments, General Johnson? I know you're having a busy day, so.
First, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm not on order, so yes, I'm trying to juggle both. And my apologies if I'm not always present, but I try to bring some thoughts when I am present. But I want to say thank you for everyone's support of use of KPOC. I think I stand on the shoulders of all those commanders that it came before me, or CA, or even Lone Tab, or Special Forces who came before me to continue to move forward. And I think the brand is strong today. It continues to improve to get and when I say the brand, the CA or use of KPOC's brand, and some of that started with believe it or not, with re-energizing Tour Drop that came back, with our international partners coming in. And then from there, we've continued not only from just the initial toy drop, that we've continued engagements beyond that. And so we're very excited about that. Clearly, we don't do everything perfect, but we're trying, and look forward to being ready to bring our capabilities to remain relevant. So thank you.
General Johnson, thank you very, very much for taking the lead on this last session. It's much appreciated to include your taking a few moments to speak to some of the areas of interest to the regimental membership as well. So Chris and Dennis, I would suggest while we're waiting for Dennis to get finished up, maybe we can take a 5-minute break for people to take a quick rest stop and refresh their coffee, etc.
Great idea.
All right, so let's rejoin ourselves in about another 5 minutes at 11:05 local time. Thanks, folks.
Okay, and Chris, I'm going to do a combo check with my folks while we're waiting. Is that okay?
Yeah, Dennis, if you want to throw up your first slide there, and you can have that as a placeholder while we're waiting for you guys to get started.
Check. Okay, standing by. I'll do that real quick.
Please make sure you're muted.
Chris, can you hear me? Okay, here we go. I had lost my ability to see, but I think I'm on now.
Yeah, sir, this is John McElligott on the back end. I can hear you loud and clear.
John, what do you see on the screen?
Sir, I see your intro slide, U.S. Army Peacekeeping and Stability Operations Proponent Update from
Okay,
Jay
great.
Lydic.
Great. Now I've got to pull up the control panel on my other screen.
You know, next year, maybe you can just feed this into an AI system and AI will do the update for you, sir.
Yeah, inshallah. Let's see. Okay, so my video has hosted stop video. So will I not be able to come up on the screen that way? I guess not. So let me ask Lieutenant Colonel Baker, can you give me a combo check? Over.
I hear you, Dennis. Help me.
Very good, thanks. Colonel Sisk? Okay, he's coming. Colonel Marek?
Have you loud and clear, Dennis?
Very good, thank you. Colonel Arndt? Is Colonel Arndt up on the net? I believe he was on the list. Okay, how about Colonel Farina?
Can you hear me? Colonel Farina here, over.
I can, very well, thank you. And then Lieutenant Colonel Munich. Stefan, are you there?
Yes, loud and clear, over.
Yeah, we hear you very well. Okay, Stefan. Standing by here until we get the call to go hot. Thanks.
Hey, Dennis, I'm up. Can you hear me?
I can, Kurt, thanks. Very good.
You're on, Dennis.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Chris. Thank you, General Van Roosen, and of course, General Maier, and to Assistant Secretary of Defense, General Johnson, I meant General Assistant Secretary of Defense Maier. Once again, we've got the opportunity to lead off the first panel following our keynote speaker this morning, and you can see the purpose here. Again, the purpose is to allow our institution and command representatives to basically tell us what's going on, what's been going on in their world since the last time we presented at the roundtable, while they're tying their comments to both the theme of the roundtable and the notes that they took from ASD Maier's presentation this morning. And interestingly, Mr. Maier's closing thoughts pretty much summed up my prepared introduction this morning. So I basically was going to say that an important element of integrated deterrence and winning without fighting, of course, is understanding the environment, understanding the operational environment. And civil affairs focuses primarily on the civil component of the operational environment, and in particular, the political, social, and economic factors that affect the ability of a host nation government to provide security and governance for their citizens at the local, provincial, and national levels. And of course, ultimately, how that operational environment affects military operations in that area. And again, as Secretary Maier said, this is particularly important in competition. And of course, civil affairs, he mentioned the Global Facility Act. So a lot of the work that civil affairs is doing under GFA is a big part of that, as is the supporting of stabilization and resiliency within our partner capabilities across the globe. And of course, building governance is a piece of that as well. And we can't do any of that without working with our interorganizational partners. And that was mentioned again very clearly by Assistant Secretary Maier this morning. So our institutional and command representatives will touch on these and some other related updates. And we also have two members of the operational force who will provide an example of how our active and reserve component civil affairs forces, at least in the Army at the moment, are working together downrange with our interorganizational partners to understand the operational environment and to support some of the, I guess, the early stages of what could be termed a long-term stability campaign or stabilization campaign on the African continent. As you can see, Colonel Holshek showed this slide earlier. We have about, the speakers here plus an additional two. And as we heard, Colonel Jay Liddick will not be participating today because he sends his regrets. He's traveling in Mozambique this week and then heading to Germany. But he wanted to me to provide a couple of points when it comes to his portion. And we also have some folks from PKSOY who may elaborate if we need to. So with that said, again, we've got limited time. So we'll go ahead and start with Lieutenant Colonel Micah Baker from the Joint CA Proponent down at SOCOM. Micah, over.
All right, Dennis, thank you. So here at SOCOM, there are a lot of things going on right now, and kind of how Dennis pointed out, a lot of what ASD Maier talked about is directly in line with what we're working on. And to that end, I'd like to thank my teammate, Lieutenant Colonel Diana Parzik up there, who's been intimately involved with ASD Maier preparing for this, and a lot of the policy level activities we're working with. Kind of a quick overview, right? So there's a lot of, I won't really call it churn, but things are changing pretty rapidly and along a broad front. And I think that's a good thing, right? So we have, a few of the things on here, right? So GFA is pushing forward, civilian harm mitigation and reduction is pushing forward. A lot of joint publications are up for review, not just JP 357. Directives are under revision, both the civil affairs and the irregular warfare, right? And I think it's a good thing because it creates a lot of opportunities. And from where I sit, I think it's brought a lot of people across the community together to try and work in unity to make sure we get a lot of things right, so we don't have to flail and fight against them down the road. There may be others who disagree. I certainly welcome that feedback if we get to any Q&A time. So I'll just work down this. So the doctrine updates 3-57 for CMO was out there. From our perspective here at SOCOM, there's a lot of bleed over and what I call conflation of CMO with CAO. And in line with ASD Maier's comment, there's a lot of everything and a lack of focus. So comments we submitted when they sent out the request for feedback, focused on, hey, let's delineate the civil affairs operations from that broader task that a GCC has to conduct civil military operations. Not saying CAO is not an important part of that, but they are not one and the same. And then our 52538, which is SOCOM's program of record for civil military engagement, that is in final staffing, sitting at the SJS, just waiting to be published. A lot of people on this call had a part in helping us get that updated. It is more focused as well on the tasks that are contained within it. This version will be classified, so that'll be available at the appropriate levels. And if anybody out there needs to see it when it's published, but is unable to get to where they can get a copy, please just let us know and we can help out. On the personnel piece, right? So that first bullet there, our policy advisor up there for civil affairs, that's Diana. We're looking at getting her extended. You know, I've shared this with my leadership here. I think she's done a phenomenal job in helping us move a lot of things forward. Having that gap filled up there has paid us dividends, I think, in the advocacy for the branch and the capability, and getting appropriate attention and representation up at the OSD and J staff level. But it's insufficient in my opinion. You know, I'm still working with Diana's office up there and HRC and SWIC, and looking at, hey, where can we increase representation on senior staff levels, not just writ large, not just more, but better aligned, so a lot of the initiatives can continue to move forward. For the training and education, right, with the campaigning, competition, integrated deterrence, the NDS language, the NMS language, right? Resistance and resilience are pretty upfront. So a member of our team, Mr. Wayne Tassler, he's been working with JSAL, trying to look at opportunities to increase education for the civil affairs force. So at our monthly joint CA proponent meeting coming up, the representative from JSAL is going to kind of talk to the community on what this course looks like, and then we'll look at how we move forward with that as an opportunity for everyone. Policy updates. So Chimmer and the action plan are a significant effort here. We're working right now on establishing the civilian environment team here at the combatant command. We've, you know, anyone involved with this, right? There's been some conversation about, hey, is this just going to be Intel people into Intel, and are they going to appropriately look at the civilian environment and all those systems that compose it? And as it stands right now, the full-time civilian environment analyst will sit in this office. They'll appropriately integrate with the civilian harm assessment cell, and the officer that runs the entire thing for the combatant command, but right now it would be right here. Several of you are tracking the 2000.13, the directive for civil affairs, and how that continues to move forward. Diana's the one up there carrying the load on that. She's the one who brings everybody together and is trying to shepherding it through the system up there. I think this is going to be a pretty significant revision. And I think it's going to be good in a lot of ways. And then I mentioned the JCAP sync meeting before. So that's where we bring all the representatives from the different services and components together. We're going to switch that to a bi-monthly. So it alternates with the TCAP sync that ASD Solic runs every other month. And we're also going to work in significant topics or presentations that really help the community out. We'll try to anyway. So that's it from us. Over to you, Dennis, or if you're going to monitor questions, if there are any.
Yeah, thanks, Micah. Yeah, I forgot to mention, we'll do questions and answers at the end once all the speakers have done their thing. And before I go on to Colonel Sisk, I just want to do a quick combo check with Captain Maier. Over.
Hey, sir, this is Captain Ammerman.
All right, great, thank you. And Sergeant First Class Boggs.
Great, I'm here.
All right, great. So stand by. Colonel Sisk, your mic. Over.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Distinguished guests and CA writ large. So at the top of our slide, you can see our priorities within the capability manager's office. And then within the bottom portion of that, you see the ongoing efforts related to the CA force. So as an update within the policy development, we're working closely with the organizations listed to ensure that current and future CA capabilities are properly captured at the policy level. This includes DoD D 2000.13 and defense support to stabilization guidance. We're also working closely to ensure these the CHIMR, the application, takes our capabilities into consideration within implementation, and as well as looking at potential positions that our force may fill within the organizations that's built out. And additionally, we're also working closely with the 95th and other organizations within the Global Fragility Act implementation. In the area of concept development, the Army Concepts and Concept Development Process assists in identifying required capabilities and existing and evolving technology that Army forces could leverage in the future to achieve their objectives. So we're actively working within the Army Operating Concept 2040, which include cross-functional annexes focused on decision advantage, protection and deception, and sustained operation. Functional appraisements with focus on the warfighting functions, the supporting functions, and future capability workbooks, which focus on organizational structures and the capabilities they bring to operations. Additionally, we are working within the USASOC campaign plan as well as the RSOF Operating Concept 2040. We've been working closely with the operations group at Mission Command Training Program and use the CAPOC to develop the scenario and master scenario event list for the Core Warfighter 23-4, which is scheduled to be executed from 19th of this month to the 28th of April. Within this exercise, the brigade CADF will be exercised, so we're anxious to see the lessons learned from the event. I saw in the chat where someone was mentioning the PRTs. You know, from my perspective, I see the CADF replacing anything where a PRT would have been utilized in future events. Within this exercise, there are going to be elements of the 95th. We'll also have, so we'll have the ability to exercise soft CFI 3. In addition to a tabletop exercise led by the 95th from 8 to 10 May, we'll also bring together elements of USACAPOC and multiple U.S. government agencies followed, allowing for civil military integration. Now, I'm sure the 95th is going to speak to this, so you know, I will leave that to them to talk more in depth about that event and its execution. Now, within Castle, we talked about Castle Initiative in last year's symposium and at the last roundtable. And within this effort, we continue to make progress in documenting a process that leverages applied social data and learning sciences to address the social, political, economic, and cultural factors that influence populations through information dominance and great power competition, multi-domain operations, and irregular warfare. Now, this initiative is combining artificial intelligence, machine learning, and analytics, hot mic, with civil affairs capabilities to provide decision makers deep understanding of population centers. for the intelligence operations and targeting processes. Now, as P. Griffiths noted within the chat, these are in their nascent stages because in order to have a really deep AI, you have to have a repository to where the AI is learning. That's the key we're missing right now, is to build out those repositories of those informations. And that's one of the things that the castle's been getting after in conjunction with the 95th and the 352nd. Because from 24 February to 30 March, we executed a proof of principle that brought together a cross-disciplinary team of analysts from the Department of State CSO, the Advanced Analytics Directorate, and NGA Human Geography and Climatology, Geospatial and Human Geography skills to support the DoD Special Operations and Conventional Force CKI teams across 3 continents. Now, we have Sergeant First Class Boggs and Captain Magerman from the 352nd on to provide a little bit more detail. So I would turn it over to them at this time so they can kind of give an overview of what transpired. Over.
All right, sir. Thank you. This is Captain Magerman. Good morning to everybody on the line. So in the room with me is our members of our battalion operations team, and also more importantly, the CTAF DCG Brigadier General Cashman, who will say a few words briefly before I add some context. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Hey, Brigadier General Brian Cashman. I'm the Deputy Commanding General for the Southern European Task Force Africa, CTAF. The R4 element for AFRICOM underneath the USARAF, the Army Service Component Command for AFRICOM. So I just want to acknowledge the tremendous value that civil affairs plays within the AFRICOM AOR in terms of Army OAIs in the AOR, and acknowledge how a small team, we have just over 90 personnel within our persistent civil affairs battalion stationed across the enormous AOR within AFRICOM. Operating persistently in about 4 countries, episodically in 3 to 4 others, looking to expand their mission set into other AORs. There's probably no other GCC that recognizes the value that CA has to the theater campaign plan for AFRICOM. In the value of CA really comes to its forefront when it's integrated into other activities in this posture limited theater. How we integrate civil affairs with the security force assistance brigades, how we integrate it into MedCaps and other Army exercises, this value that civil affairs has to pursuing the objectives for the theater. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and to really illuminate the uniqueness in the expansive AOR of AFRICOM in this complex and dynamic environment we're operating in, and really appreciate USA KPOC's contributions to this theater. So Mike, over to you.
Thank you, sir. To provide some additional context to the work that we've been fortunate enough to participate in from January through March of this year, interagency working group supported a response generally to the RFI you see on the slide. However, from a collaboration standpoint, it was an amazing experience from a reserve CA perspective. I'm with within the 352nd CA command, but a member of out of the 360th CA brigade, 450th CA battalion. And then we work with our counterparts on the active duty side, Sergeant Boggs, who will add a note here at the end, and then as well as members from the Department of State, OSD, SOCOM. It was a great collaborative effort. Initially, the first few stabs at our touch points or working groups was just organizations that are going to help us solve this problem. And then when we had the opportunity to look at what that RFI was, a big part of the exercise was we are obviously very quick to try and collect all the data we can and try and solve the problem as quickly as possible. But there were several iterations of what are we really being asked? Who's the audience that this question might go to, and how do we really break down, pages and pages of just data points, trying to provide that specific analysis that really delivers the message based on what the question might be. And where we ended up over the last several weeks was a very, is in the form of a request for information research report, or better known or become known as the R3. And you see a snapshot of what that looks like from the top front page standpoint there on the screen. Essentially, it was a cut down version of 25 to 30 pages of really great analysis from our counterparts, because usually on the CA soldier side of things, we have analysts or soldiers, 38 Bravos, 38 Alphas on the reserve side, at least, that might have an opportunity to do open source research and collect data, and we work together to provide the best answer we can. But layering on the interagency expertise with the Department of State, NGA, OSD really gave us an advantage to provide an even more in-depth and precise answer. And also part of it was acknowledging that there's probably still research from an open source standpoint or via CA teams. Wrapping it up, it was a great exercise. At this point, we are postured to continue using this format to answer similar RFIs as a team moving forward. And I know AI, and the way that this document is formatted, is intended to be digested by those systems and stored over time. So again, it was a great exercise, great opportunity, and looking forward to continuing it moving forward. Sergeant Boggs, I wanted to also pass it over to you to see point of view.
Okay, good morning, everyone. This is Sergeant First Class Boggs. I want to say that this collaborative effort was it was a very good way that to link all of the organizations together, come together with their side of research, and then combine that together to answer a question which can further be developed into NAIs and TAIs for later COA dev. It was a great honor working with all our partners. I want to say that through the process, it was a little rough at first because of the processes and procedures were kind of different between 91st and the Castle team and the reserves and NGA, and State Department. So we all came together, figured that out, and we developed this R3 format. This was able to be shared amongst all organizations for the decision makers to make decisions. Over.
What is today?
All right, so hey, I would also like to mention Dr. Tracy St. Benoit, who's worked extensively to get this project moving and to make the connections between the reserve, the active, as well as the interagency. So I was wondering if Tracy, if you're on, if you wouldn't mind coming on and saying a few things regarding your efforts within the R3 process and its way forward. Over.
Thank you, Colonel Sisk, and hats off to the Civil Affairs team of teams, which has demonstrated that Civil Affairs Reserves and Civil Affairs Soft can work together. And this was a labor-intensive, intellectually intensive proof of principle. It's moved beyond proof of concept, proof of principle that we can do this in the intergovernment and across the CA enterprise to look at real-world problem sets that are going to be meaningful to our partners within the government, especially under the Global Fragility Act. This is a great demonstration with our partners of state who are the lead with Global Fragility Act and how CA contributes to that. NGA, I don't believe they have any representatives here, but they are focusing specifically on human geography and how that helps us understand the lack of information that exists across, let's call it the human domain, that is being reinvigorated, and civil affairs and its intergovernment and interagency partners are the lead for this. And this is why this demonstration of the Global Fragility Act showed that it can be done. It might have been painful at some points, but we got together and within 6 weeks, they were able to produce this product, which demonstrates the intergovernment. It demonstrates that reserves can work with soft CA and produce something that's meaningful. So this is just the beginning, and hats off to Captain Ammerman and Sergeant First Class Boggs and the commanders that provided the opportunity to do this, Lieutenant Colonel Uhurka, Colonel Kuzmark, and of course, Colonel Sisk and Colonel Cahill and Colonel Suganen that took the opportunity to say, hey, what can we do? Hats off to the war fighters and our intergovernment partners. I'd like to give an opportunity, if possible, if we have time, for our state rep from the CSO Advanced Analytics Cell that was instrumental in ensuring that this moved forward in partnership with Department of State. Dr. Peter Griffiths, over.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy. And thank you all for entertaining me for a moment. I really want to extend my thanks as well to the partners across the intergovernment here with the Soft CA, Reserve CA, and OSD and NGA all coming to the table here. I keep bringing up the GFA not because I think that it's fundamental to what we do, but I think that in this context, the GFA is really the forcing function that has us all coming to the same place at the same time. Which is, I think, what we needed to really give us the impetus to sit down and start working together. I cannot speak for the entirety of the Department of State, but I can certainly speak for my office, where we see the Civil Affairs Corps as being the natural partner within the Department of Defense enterprise to start addressing some of these issues of instability. And the more that we can work together, both operationally, but as well as analytically and on the research side, to get after some of these sticky human domain questions so that we can better understand the operational environment, better inform our operations and our policies. I think that the better we will collectively be able to operate in advancing our U.S. national security strategy and our foreign policy. And I think that the impetus on the last 20 years of GWAT, if you will, has shifted some of the stabilization impetus over to DoD. And I think ASD Maier sort of talked about this a little bit, where it's now back over in the civilian side per 3005, et cetera. And we need DoD's help too, right? And I think and would hope that DoD can say the same about DOS, as well as the rest of the intergovernment space. And so it was really a privilege and an honor to work alongside the folks from DoD and the other agencies here to come together on a common purpose. And I look forward to doing so again. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Pete. And more to follow. Obviously, this was a short-term principle, and we continue to work through this problem set so that we get better at it. So let me move on to Colonel Kuzmark, 95th CA Brigade. Dave, your mic, over.
Great, thanks, Dennis. I appreciate it, and thanks to everybody that's out there. If we go to the next slide. Okay, just wanted to lay out for everybody the three priorities that we've been working towards in the 95th for about the last year. First that you see up there is investing in people. Obviously, talent management and personnel management are two totally different things. And with the direction that the Army is going, both in terms of their commander selection, but also to their demand upon civil affairs, we really needed to take a look at how we were managing the folks in our formations. So first off, we've been very successful in terms of our folks competing for commands, but also we have a lot of individuals that have very good capabilities and are good in other areas as well, particularly on the staffing and the planning pieces. So working through the regular Army processes to be able to highlight them so that we're getting the best people in the best assignments that are playing to their strengths so that we can continue to push the civil affairs narrative and also, continue to do the planning that's necessary at the higher levels, at the operational and strategic levels to be able to support our campaigning and the NDS priorities. This includes not only the officers, but also the NCOs as well. So taking advantage of those initiatives. Number two, the operational tempo and global force employment. We've really taken a hard look coming out of the GWAT of how we've done global force employment. What we've seen is that in some instances, a persistent presence is necessary. And this is definitely in some of the more critical areas where we've seen a lot of return. There are areas, however, where we think that we can cover multiple areas simply by having a more dynamic employment model. And this means things like regional FTN. So working with Micah down at SOCOM and the folks up in the NCR to start pushing some of that, as well as with the GCCs and the TSOCs, I think we've got a way forward that's able to get through the SDOB for some of those more regional FTNs that allow our forces to be able to go forward, conduct specific civil affairs, whether it's civil reconnaissance or civil engagements missions in a larger area. And then I really wanted to focus on number three, because that obviously seemed to be the topics that everybody's been, very focused on over the next year. And I know that previous speakers have mentioned it. We talked about civil affairs and competition and support to campaigning, but also large scale combat operations. So, Kurt, you brought up some of the work that's being done in preparation for the warfighter exercise. This is really to help delineate and work that seam between soft civil affairs and then the larger horsepower that USAC-CAPOC and the USAC-CAPOC community brings. The 95th cannot do all of the things that's required for civil affairs. It really relies on the USAC-CAPOC component. So working with 1st Armored Division and with 3rd Corps, the whole point of the Civil Affairs Task Force with Nicole Alexander and her folks down at the 92nd is to really work those gaps and seams amongst both the components to figure out how 95th forces can help actually support stabilization more in the long term with the USAC-CAPOC entities, and then also to supporting the maneuver forces, up front along the FLOT and in some of the deep areas as well. So that'll be something that we'll be looking to experiment with, and some of those lessons learned we'll bring out and look forward to sharing those over the next couple of months. And then when we talk about competition, again, I think it's been brought up numerous times. It is really an integrated plan. It's at the GCC level. Competition means in some places taking the initiative, in other places pulling back, and in some instances it's just observing and reporting. But it does require both the active and the reserve component to get the largest return on the investments. And what you see there in the second bullet under number 3 is perfecting that civil affairs set with the interagency spike. One civil affairs team working in a specific country is going to have limited results, but where they can be able to bring the force of the interagency and bring the whole of government approach, that's where you really start getting the large scale returns on the investment. Obviously, our competitors have learned to do that. They're doing it to scale and they're doing it to speed. I think we can get better in those areas, and working with some of our planners up at the TSOC, integrating with the interagency to figure out exactly what they need to be able to push forward some of those initiatives and to be able to complete on a global and trans-regional scale is something that we're pushing very hard within the 95th. AI and ML, civil reconnaissance. This is something that I will be truth in lending, not necessarily very up to speed on. I am not as technical, I guess, as I probably should, but I'm great to have folks out there like Sergeant First Class Boggs and to Dr. Sim Benoit and the rest of the folks out there. Thank you very much for continuing to push that. This is something that I think as we look at competing, we need to be able to get faster. We need to be able to get more refined, and we need to be able to become more targeted, because time and resources are the thing in which we don't have necessarily a lot of. And being able to basically take AI, which is essentially 14th century math and incorporate it with reams of data to figure out exactly where civil affairs teams need to go, maybe where the interagency would have the best return. That's, I think, the goal that we're shooting for in the next 12 to 15 months. You had the Castle briefing as well, and I think that is a absolutely fabulous start. I have actually the external report right here with me and been reviewing it. And I think it's, in terms of supporting the efforts, particularly in coastal West Africa, exactly the focus where we need to have. So bringing that in, it first requires, the capabilities to access the data that's out there. And there's so much of it to be able to sort through it. And it's not just within the DoD and it's not civil affairs teams, but it's also within the interagency, whether we talk about commerce or we talk about energy or we talk about treasury or even some of our partners. So we want to be able to continue to leverage that because we do want to be faster and more responsive. And then last, this is one of the first kind of initiatives that I'd started asking the questions of, and there've been some discussions I saw previously with General Johnson about, hey, how do we get better integrated? Well, I think the talent sharing, and you saw it there in terms of the Castle team doing that, the integration with Colonel Gannon and her folks, and then the 91st. I mean, we're doing this all the time, but I think, where we need to maybe look at is the permeability of folks going between Compo 1 and Compo 3. I don't know how to get there, but I think it's probably something that's worth looking at. There's no reason why folks can't come over to the active component and sit in the active formations for several years, and vice versa, especially if we're sharing talents across the board. But those are the three priorities that we've laid out for the 95th, and I'll be standing by for questions after this.
All right, Dave, thanks very much. Appreciate that. And as I wrote in the chat there, if anyone has any questions, please tee them up and we'll get to them after the main presentations. So next we'll move to Colonel Arndt over at USCAPOC. Jason, your mic, over.
Hey, good morning, and thanks for that, and thanks to everyone that's participating today. I think this is a great opportunity to get together and really talk about some of the issues and ways that we can get after these issues within the Civil Affairs Regiment. So thank you very much for that. We can go to the next slide. Before I go through this really short update, I just, we were asked to kind of react to Honorable Mayor's comments, and I think just the thing that I kind of got out of that, and certainly willing to hear other people's thoughts on this too, but he talked a lot about, how do we get an enduring advantage? When he talks about resilience, he's talking about, well below, I think, the traditional partners that we would work with, not necessarily governmental, but, really getting into the lower levels of community groups and things like that. And he also talked about being, how civil affairs can be a portal to the rest of the Department of Defense, and then also to other government agencies, and then, that portal working both ways where, it's not just, U.S. forces getting this access, but also our allies and partners getting more access. And I think, really to kind of realize some of what he is talking about just leads us to, or leads me at least, to think about, how we are getting after a common operating picture. And I know, we have a lot of different things, different theaters are doing this in different ways. And we just really, in my opinion, at least, we have not gotten our arms completely around this, how do we have a COP tool that, we can standardize, not just within the regiment, but then also within the other non-lethal or non-kinetic communities, IO, PSYOP, cyber, and things like that, so that we can really demonstrate this value proposition that he's talking about to the commanders. We're able to portray this in a way that is meaningful and understandable, not just left, right, up, and down, but also to our allies and partners, and these other elements within the community. So I'll just leave that out there, and then I'm going to go into this slide. Okay, so the first bullet up there is information advantage. And again, I think that kind of gets to a lot of what Honorable Mayor was talking about, where, this is how we're going to change. It's going to change how we think about influence more broadly, not just in terms of a particular community or skill set, but we're going to be able to converge information related capabilities into a single effort that is going to develop this enduring advantage for the United States and U.S. interests. With that, the R-Struck this year is extremely delayed. We're about 4 months late right now. And when that does come out, we anticipate that there are going to be some either new elements called theater information advantage detachments, or there's going to be changes within the division chief staff structure that is going to give us more opportunities to plug in with larger forces and synchronize and synergize our efforts. So more to follow on that. But also within the information advantage, there is another effort called the Campaign of Learning. So this year's Pacific Century, KPOC is going to have elements out there that are going to replicate the theater information advantage detachment. And then next year, we're going to support the United States Army, Europe, and Africa in their Avenger Triad exercise. And that's going to be a little bit different, a little bit bigger. We're still going to replicate the Triad, but then we're also going to be creating these touch points at the ASCC, at the cores, and things like that. So it'll be a larger network, and we're going to see more about how we can converge these capabilities at the operational and strategic levels. Going down to that force design update, I know there was a number of questions earlier. We, like Colonel Fisk and Dr. Walsh briefed, we're still on track. We're looking for E-dates that would start in September 25. Not all units would convert exactly at the same time, but starting in or about September 25. And we're looking at 2 more milestones that we still need to resolve, not, like what Dr. Walsh talked about with, the various approvals, like he talked about, it's through the Combined Arms Center. Now it's waiting on HQDA, but these other 2 things. So one is in the reserve component, the civil affairs branch would become an accessions branch, which obviously means that we need a basic officer leaders course to train those new lieutenants. So we're working with SWCC to figure out what that looks like, what the resourcing looks like, and how we can, partner with SWCC to make that course a reality. And then the other piece of that, when this force design update goes through, generally speaking, civil affairs units, from the team up to the KCOM are getting larger. So since we're in a no growth environment from a manpower standpoint, we're going to have to reallocate some of our existing civil affairs billets around. And that is going to lead to the inactivation of 4 civil affairs battalions. Right now, we anticipate that decision is going to happen in the late July, early August timeframe, but more to follow on that. The CG has approved a decision-making framework that is looking at both subjective and objective factors to try to find the best way to do this so that we can retain as many soldiers as possible and set them up to make a smooth transfer into one of these new organizations. Going down to exercises, I think the one thing that I really want to highlight there is that 86 joint exercise program events that you see there. That is one of the key ways that KPOC gets after the support to the combatant commanders' campaign plans, is by participating in their joint exercise program. So 86 separate events, that's across the command. That's not just strictly civil affairs. And then, many people have already talked about this, General Johnson in particular, but that warfighter. So we see, in some of our exercises, it's a little bit challenging whether, we think about our customers, and, General Johnson talked about the combatant commands and the ASCCs being some of our key customers, but I mean, it extends even further down to the Corps commanders and how we're going to enable their fight. And, you know, and that's a challenge for some of the exercises. When we have the right customers, the scenario often focuses on, you know, tactical and operational problems that, you know, and the scenario doesn't really support the non-lethal or non-kinetic operations that, you know, drive our training objectives. Or we have an exercise that focuses very well on the non-lethal, non-kinetic aspect, and we don't have the right customers there to enable. So this warfighter is really going to bridge a lot of those gaps, you know, along with what a lot of the other speakers have been talking about, really an innovative design. And we want to expand and grow this into the other warfighters going forward. And it looks like that's going to happen. The combined or the Mission Command training program is really supportive of this, and they see the benefit. Going down to integration, you know, a lot of great examples already today about how Compo 1, Compo 3 forces can team and integrate together. You know, we have the 83rd Civil Affairs Battalion that is inactivating. That unit has an extremely high op tempo, but we're still looking at a lot of those missions that they were doing are transferring over to the reserve component. So 4 have already transferred, 2 are pending, and there's others that are in the works. But I think that even without the 83rd Civil Affairs Battalions, we'll still be able to provide that same level of customer support to the combatant commands and the service components. General Johnson really briefly mentioned Operation Toy Drop. That is scheduled for this coming December 3 to 16. Both the first part is you know, the KPOC and 18th Airborne Corps portion, and then later in that time frame is the soft week. And in conjunction with that, we're planning our military ball on the 9th. And, you know, we're going to try and bring as many foreign partners to that event as possible, and hopefully as many of the other units that are here at Fort Bragg as well. Going down to modernization, a lot of this is tied to the FDU as well. You know, but that first bullet there is that civil knowledge integration. You know, our new formations are going to have teams that are better tailored to accomplish that pillar of civil affairs, the civil knowledge integration. But like I had previously mentioned, we're still lacking, I think, some tools for the common operating picture. So we're moving in the right direction. I don't think that we're completely there yet, but we're getting towards that. Civil affairs teams. I think the key takeaway there is that in the reserve component, the team size is essentially going to double. And that's where you're going to see the new civil affairs lieutenants, where they would be an assistant team leader. But basically, the larger team is going to add capacity and capability at the team level to accomplish more, you know, in support of the maneuver units. And then that last bullet there, the Civil Affairs Task Force. Civil Affairs brigades and KCOMs will now have some additional personnel, but also equipment to mission command other forces, you know, whether that's in the core, rear, or support area, or the joint security area, where a Civil Affairs Task Force may be more beneficial than any other element that the joint force could field. In terms of AMED officer recruiting, this is kind of interesting. So we've been talking a lot about 38 Golf and some of the successes there. It is a long process to bring in a 38 Golf through the direct commissioning program, but we're making good progress on that. But another interesting way that we're bringing new talent to the Civil Affairs Regiment is through AMED. So in the reserve component, AMED recruited too many people, and also their force structure changed. So they're a little bit overstrength on the officer side. And so HRC has created exception to policy. Normally, you know, AMED officers are managed very differently and very restrictively, but right now it's wide open, and AMED officers can transfer branches. And so we've been extremely aggressive about targeting that population and finding these second and first lieutenants that are at the right point to start a career in civil affairs, and just gauge their interest and bring them over if that is something that they want to do. So currently, this year we've already moved 212 officers over, and we're still working another 50 candidates. And then my last bullet there is just the known senior leader moves at this time. The Deputy Commanding General of KPOC is Brigadier General Carter. She is going to move to the 350th Civil Affairs Command and take over that. She will be backfilled by Brigadier General Sanders, who is currently the commander of 352. And so there are obviously going to be some more GO moves this summer, but not all of that has been announced yet. So that concludes my update. And like I said, I will continue to be on. And once we get through with this, if there's any KPOC specific questions, then we'll circle back to those. But thanks.
Hey, Jason, thanks very much. Appreciate it. And we're going to move on real quick to our next speaker, who is actually me, because Colonel Liddick, as I said, is not here today. But he did want me to pass on at least two big items for the group. One is PKSOI's continued work on institutionalizing the Joint Interagency Stabilization Course. And the second is that PKSOI is planning a resiliency summit for late August 2023, tentatively scheduled for the 22nd to the 24th of August. And it's designed to bring together stabilization practitioners from across the echelons, including Department of State and USAID, to cross-level best practices, identify new relevant information for resilience, identify current challenges and potential solutions, and build a network of those who work these challenges from an institutional and operational perspective. I understand that we have both Colonel Marcus Snow and Travis Bolio from PKSOI on here. Do either of you want to expand on that or have any additional information from PKSOI? Over.
No, Dennis, I think you nailed it. And reading some of the chat comments regarding, this is Colonel Snow, regarding the interagency, that's what the JIASIC is all about, is trying to square that interagency circle and bring our partners in. Somebody actually mentioned Treasury Department and such in the chat. Those are all the invitees. It is the only interagency course focused on stabilization. And the resiliency summit, or stabilization summit, as we might call it as well, is to bring in all the stakeholders in one spot so that we can get that master Rolodex, if you will, and that master index of concerns from GCCs and KCOMs and use of KPOC and all interested parties. So Dennis, I think you got it.
Marcus, great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. So with that, we will go to Colonel Jennifer Farina and Marine Corps update. Jen, your mic, over.
Can you all hear me there? Just a mic check.
You're good.
Hey, were you able to get that next slide? Hey, folks, very happy to be here. Thank you for including the Marine Corps in these discussions. Put a very basic slide in there because a lot of the things that the Marine Corps is doing, it can really be taken away from this slide. I've also submitted for separate reading just where we're going for professionalization in the Marine Corps. Marine Corps right now for civil affairs is going through a transformation, professionalization and modernization, where both our PSYOPs, our MISO, and our civil affairs are becoming one occupation. And when I say that, we will still have our civil affairs peer, which we have resident in our reserve component, our civil advisory groups, as well as we offered across the Marine Corps as an additional occupation. But if you look at the slide there, the big takeaway is that we are creating an influence Marine that's going to go through the entire pipeline on the active duty component side, which which first of all will build our force. What we have right now with the Marine Corps is you're probably looking at about 900 students that go through a year. So we're talking about a small population. But as we continue building the civil affairs, we're going to have more additional occupation Marines that are going to be trained. And if we're looking across the Marine Corps, we'll see it not only at our newly stood MEF information groups, but at our MAR4s, our joint, as well as our MUs and our MEFs. So over the last 4 years, the Marine Corps, when we stood up our cyber, as we professionalized it, and let me just take a moment back, our biggest challenge in the Marine Corps is when we had these all as additional MOSs, there was not a pyramid for professionalization either on the officer or the enlisted. So our first kind of build were those cyber Marines and those cyber officers. Over the last 3 years, we were able to bring on space. And then over the last 2 years, civil affairs and PSYOPs. And so when you look at the pyramid for professionalization and modernization, this is to grow them to either an E9 or a colonel. And that's kind of where, at least with the Marine Corps on the active duty side, a number of these Marines would have this profession, and then they would go back to their communities, whether it was a logistics community, infantry community, and they just could not compete. And they would almost just get lost for all the professionalization and the experience that they had been doing in this field. So in the last 2 years with the professionalization, we've been able to realign these communities. So Force Design 2030 for the Marine Corps, we went through a number of working groups where we deactivated a number of units and realigned also a number of units. So again, with the modernization of the Influence Now Marine, that is in some ways on the active duty side, 2 hats, on the reserve side, still very much 1 hat. If we look at it over the next 10 years, we're expecting that a number of our kind of pure influence Marines are going to start populating our reserve forces. So we're going to have to accommodate both a pure influence that goes through the entire pipeline and our civil affairs Marines that still exist in our civil advisory groups. Now, just to kind of bring you all through, in the last few years, we stood up the MEF information groups that hold the majority of our influence Marines. We've stood up the Marine Corps Information Command, which is an additional hat for the MAR4 Cyber CG. Deputy Commandant of Information has stood up in the last 7 years. Again, a realignment of all of these different types of information type of occupations. And then now going back to this slide, we are taking active steps to streamline the education pipeline. And when you look at this, you have a technical and a cognitive kind of showing good stewardship and kind of taking care of the entire community. In our headquarters command, all of these capabilities fall within our information maneuver department. So again, as we follow on with the information schoolhouse, we're expecting by FY25 to have our POIs at least underneath 1 hat. And then on the influence side, be able to have 1 schoolhouse director to be able to manage or if not, at least inform that Marine Corps pipeline. On the readiness front, again, we are completely leaning forward. It's kind of a disjointed way right now within the schoolhouses because we have about 5 different schoolhouses when you talk about the technical and the cognitive side that we have to work and kind of manage these students. And for specifically the influence, whether it's officer and enlisted, we have a handful. So by putting it underneath 1 director, We're really just working with our brothers down at the JFK Center to align our pipeline. I did want to get in a little bit about the AI ML piece here, what the Marine Corps is doing. So when we're talking about organizing civil affairs as a capability, it is one of a few others that we are working to kind of enable the capabilities. A number of our cells, whether it's in our Fires and Effects Center or our information planning cell, we're building these cross-functional teams. And I think the challenge that we're finding out across not only the Marine Corps, but multiple services, that you have multiple different COPs, different dashboards, different types of vendors that are doing PAI or collecting civil information. So our biggest challenge that we've been doing and kind of doing proof of concepts is trying to find interoperability areas that we can kind of bring a number of these capabilities together. One of the things that the Marine Corps has is, of course, is our MARSIMS, which is our civil information environment kind of data repository, that we're actually working proof of concepts right now for a number of building out PAI, CAI information that can be pulled into that hardware software device, going up to the cloud, and then of course getting integrated into the TAC with feeding into C2IE. So some of our proofs of concept, we're able to kind of work with the individual vendors and demonstrate whether it's at IWX or Battle-Catan right now. And our hope is bringing existing programs of record together that can find areas of interoperability. Now we're just looking at general collection and curation. And then our other piece that we're doing on the AI ML front is working with our warfighting lab and different types of labs, test and evaluation labs, to see where we can capitalize on bringing vendor agnostic. It's mostly focused in on the data, to pull together and do levels of AI ML to create, you know, whatever the information exchange requirement is to be able to bring that information together. We're looking at the lowest level so we can get the guy on the ground, as well as the highest level in order to feed it into whatever that dashboard or SIP COP is. Again, it's an exciting front right now because we're working with the different fire and effects coordination centers to kind of get best in breed and find ways to increase data sharing and to be able to make sure the right people have the right information at the right level. And again, it's a little bit of a disparate effort right now, but we're seeing levels of success because it's also bringing in the 6, and I have to say I am a 6, so that's also an interesting thing on the Marine Corps front, is that you're finding a number of our 2s and 6s being responsible for at least these coordination cells in standing up these cells that are going to have cyberspace, EMSO, and these now influenced Marines on the active duty component. Just a few other notes there, and then I'll open it up for any questions. But the biggest challenge that the Marine Corps has had right now is realignment. So in the last 18 months, we've seen a number of units that at the lowest level have worked great and fantastic together. But as we do these larger reorganizations, it's reestablishing that connective tissue and that capability. So one of the fronts that we have going right now are crosswalking those capabilities across the Marine Corps, because one of the things that we're lacking right now is we have a number of publications that are due to come out to kind of solidify our concept of employment. And it's not just civil affairs on its own, but it's how civil affairs is a piece of a larger effort and a larger capability. And how does it stay pure? how does it inform others, and how do others inform, you know, the capability that we're trying to put out specifically for civil affairs. Just trying to see if there's anything else that I wanted to hit on here. But again, I'm very interested in the castle piece there, because I believe interoperability is the way to go, and data sharing is a way to go. I think the biggest challenge that we have right now is that I think our space is flooded with different types of vendors and contract vehicles. And the one thing I did want to mention about the Marine Corps is in the last 18 months, we stood up a program of record to actually get at all of these disparate vendors that are trying to honestly peddle whatever their capability is. And I think it's a large challenge when we put it on an organization to kind of pick through so many different types of tools that are out there. So the biggest challenge that we're trying to work through right now is to remember that we're talking about the environments, to bring in the IMKM, to bring in the 6, to bring in the 2, so we can have a cohesive capability to bring together the civil information environment and actually have management of that data. So again, a lot of different types of activities going on for the Marine Corps. I do want to do a shout out to the JFK Center. They've been absolutely fantastic, involving the Marine Corps Schoolhouse, and also another shout out to SOCOM for their initiatives and involving also the Marine Corps and as well as OSD, so we can crosswalk a number of our different service policies to make sure that we're all nested. But I'll pause for any questions, but that's just a snapshot of where the Marine Corps is at today. Over.
Colonel Farina, thank you very much. Actually, before we get to questions, we've got one more presenter, and that will be Lieutenant Colonel Stefan Mulik. And so Stefan, your mic, over.
Thank you very much, sir. First of all, I want to thank you again for the opportunity to talk in front of that great community. And I have to stress that I don't have an official mandate to represent NATO points, but it's rather my attempt to reflect on relevant developments within the alliance to the civil affairs community. I want to start with something positive. Next slide, please. And the first bullet is, we have a NATO agreed term for multi-domain operations. And that definition is a positive thing for the joint function of CIMIC, as it contains non-military activities. I will read it out once, and you will find it on my second slide for later reference. So multi-domain operations in NATO are the orchestration of military activities across all operational domains and environments, synchronized with non-military activities to enable the alliance to create converging effects at the speed of relevance. So that's with a regard to the future perspective of the alliance and how we approach operations, multi-domain operations. I would say the CIMIC and civil military aspect is really prominently reflected. That's a positive thing. Now, when I come to my next bullet, it's less positive, because we are really lacking progress when it comes to the NATO policy on CIMIC, which is still on hold, as we have two allies debating about a paragraph that's not really content related, but more I would say a political debate. Unfortunately, we are affected by that, and so we really lack our ability to adapt fast to changing realities, and to put that those conceptual framework and positive signals into reality. But the same applies to my next bullet. NCS stands for NATO Command Structure. This is the permanent standing NATO structure that is permanently manned by the allies, but under a permanent NATO command. In the current adaptation process, CIMIC is still losing positions and by that relevance. And this is in contrary to our conceptual and doctrinal idea to have that proves an increased relevance of how you would say civil knowledge integration, how we would say civil factor integration. And what we mean by that is the integration of the understanding of the civil environment. We have to develop that capability. It's a huge challenge. And to do that, we would rather have to grow than to shrink. But reality looks different, as this understanding hasn't made it into the brains of decision makers, and unfortunately also still not into all brains of the community, of the CIMIC and civil affairs community. The fourth bullet is kind of a standard update. We have published the study draft of Allied Joint Publication 3.19, which is NATO doctrine on CIMIC. Study draft 2 published according to the plan. It's out for commenting since 1st of March. It will be out for commenting for 19 days, so until the end of May, and then we will continue in the process. We hope that we can stick to the timeline and come to a ratification draft by the fourth quarter of this year. And unfortunately, we might even be quicker than the NATO policy, which is quite unlucky. Internal CCOE internal thing is our synchronization project. It's not internal, it's initiated internally and driven internally, but we have a great counterparts within the civil affairs community. We really see the relevance in increasing the interoperability and synchronize NATO CIMIC with US civil affairs. That's why the overall goal is to gain the United States as a sponsoring nation for the CIMIC Center of Excellence. We have initiated the process. We have good sponsorship from all our counterparts, being it 7th Army Training Command, being it US Army Europe J9, being it US EUCOM J9, who recently visited the CCOE. But in the end, we need decision makers, flag officers who are willing, really willing to offer a slot to give a full-time position for a US officer and hopefully also an NCO to become a part of the CIMIC Center of Excellence. With regard to our institutionalization of the partnership with SWIC, and forgive me the typo, of course it's JFK and not JFC, Special Warfare Center and School. We are on a good way, so we are drafting a formal agreement, and we are positive that it might be signed during a visit of our director to SWIC in summer of this year. We are currently scheduling for July. Then one more agreement announcement that the comparison paper of the protection of civilians implementation within NATO compared with the civil harm mitigation response mitigation and response action plan of the Department of Defense. The paper is finished and it's available. Currently, we don't publish it on the internet, but we are very happy to push it to you via email to read into it. I think it triggers some critical thinking about the role of CIMIC and of civil affairs in this very important and relevant field. One more addition that is not depicted here on the slide. We have the third edition of our academic book is initiated. The overall headline is from civil military interaction to civil military interoperability and integration. We are striving for a transatlantic view. So we are having European and North American authors in it. So I want to advertise for the book in advance to really initiate your appetite for it. Next slide. This is a bit of a ruined, formatly ruined sketch of a poster that we are currently developing that is actually an attempt to depict the basics of AJP 319 in a poster. And the main message is we really want to focus on CIMIC, the joint function CIMIC, that it is bigger than CIMIC capabilities. You can compare it that the joint function of CIMIC would represent civil military operations, and the staff function CIMIC and CIMIC capabilities will represent civil affairs operations. That's the way I understand it. And this is really the big picture, that the joint function CIMIC is commander's responsibility, and it's executed by all staff functions. And it consists of two core activities, which are civil factor integration. I think the most appropriate terminology from the US side would be civil knowledge integration. And we have civil military interaction as the second key core activity that make up the joint function. This is also an offer to explain that poster in events. We are having our parts in civil affairs career courses. We are offering a mission preparation course that has been booked several times from civil affairs unit. We're trying to institutionalize that, and this will be a part of the course to understand NATO CIMIC basics, in addition to the CIMIC basics of earmarked host nations in Europe, where civil affairs units are foreseen to deploy to. That's it in a nutshell, and I'm very happy to get any further questions in the Q&A session and follow on conversations offline via email or via virtual means. Back to you, sir.
All right, thank you, Stefan. And we're actually down to about 6 minutes worth of Q&A time, unfortunately, because of the hard stop at the bottom of the hour. But there is a question for you, Stefan, in the bottom of the chat from Stanislava. I would ask that you probably respond to that directly while I get to her actual first question that she posed to Lieutenant Colonel Baker about, he spoke about the thinking being done on the training, which is needed for civil affairs in the context of the Global Fragility Act. Could you speak to what some of the specific gaps in knowledge and skills are, which you are identifying, and whom do you hope to engage in the interagency in order to fill those gaps? Over to Maier.
Hey, thanks, Dennis. I don't think we've got like a hard set on what are the gaps right now, but that is what we're looking at in the upcoming TTX, up the joint staff next month. That's one of the major outputs we're looking for, is, what are the gaps in both the knowledge with the forces conducting it, as well as the integration with interagency partners, and how we pass off activities back and forth in that. Colonel K may have something else on that from his viewpoint as a participant.
No, I agree, Micah. That's exactly what we're kind of looking for, is that specifically. In the TTX, we should have some good feedback from it. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Quickly, I'm going to bypass a couple of the questions on AI and ML, and sorry, Karen, we're going to skip your one on the TIAD for the moment. But I want to go to Giancarlo's question regarding industry moving faster than government, and how is the 95th and KPOC better engaging industry to help with their innovation? Over.
I can take the first swing at that one, Dennis. Hey, so really where we've started to reach out, and this is kind of recultivating some previous relationships, is starting work with Dr. Barkas over at the University of Notre Dame, the Mendoza School. And she's put us in contact with some additional folks within industry, specifically with the AI ML. So a couple of folks at Amazon, and kind of how they approach building their teams to be able to, meet the capability. Just actually had a meeting with them about 2 weeks ago, and the biggest takeaway from that was, identifying what the problem is that you're trying to solve. So you'd think it'd be pretty simple, but it actually isn't, because we do a really good job of creating a whole bunch of really cool things, but they end up being, elaborate solutions to non-existent problems. But then also too, more practical work forward. I know that, like Jeffrey Herker and his folks over at the 91st are looking at like rare earth minerals and those types of things. So they're working very closely with, some of the academia out there, as well as some of the, private sector mining companies and things, to just kind of get a better idea of how to approach that and look at leveraging the impact of the private sector to be able to do some of those kind of bigger finishes, if you will. Over.
Thank you. And Jason, for KPOC, anything? If not, we've got a comment from Colonel Farina. Over.
Yeah, no, I'll just, I know time is short. So really, our partnership with, various industries or academic institutions is tied to the 38 golf program. And so like General Johnson said, we've got 6 partnerships going from the cultural property protection to water to agriculture and things like that. We have not targeted any of the institutions yet, to work on the AI, the problem set yet. So really no new news there.
So this is Colonel Farina. Just a quick comment on that. Again, putting my 6th hat on. So I work with the Service Data Office. So for those not familiar, DOD and OSD stood up the Service Data Office to get at the kind of all of this. And one hat that they have is AI/ML. So the challenge is all this disparate information, disparate kind of capabilities that are very vendor specific. And the biggest challenge that I've seen, which we're working towards, are the larger environments. Why are we paying someone for storage? Why are we paying multiple people for storage? Why are we paying, for just common capabilities? And where the Marine Corps is looking to focus in on, especially with AI/ML, is not just being able to collect this information, curate this information, and then depending on the domain, analysis to inform further analysis. It's taking a lot of these smaller bites to align some of these technologies and a lot of these common equities. I hate to say, looking to see how we can streamline how we spend our money to get a very specific capability. So, I'm absolutely available. But whoever wants to collaborate on this, but I believe it is getting the IMKM, the 6, the 2. And for us, it's called the influence, but it's the civil affairs, the MSO. It's these information types of occupations having us being more nested and tied together. And then we could break apart and approach what type of information needs to be employed to support our requirements. But AI/ML, there's a lot that's out there. We just need to forget that, one shoe does not fit all, or one size does not fit all. And there's going to be multiple out there, and it's the interoperability piece and an enterprise kind of piece, building an ecosystem is how we need to approach this. But again, just my thoughts. And then if anyone else is interested, how we're working towards kind of management and relationship with multiple vendors, because we're not going to get rid of industry, but they just have a foot ahead on these capabilities. And we don't have an agile enough process to make, our software factories be so very relevant to make it so accessible to the community. Thank you for allowing me to comment. Over.
All right, thank you, Jen. And we're at our time limit, so I want to thank our panel members and thanks to all others who participated this morning. Chris, over to you for further instructions. Over.
Dennis, thanks very much as usual. A great roundup. You pack a lot of information and great value to the community in an hour and a half. Much appreciated, sir. Thank you for your hard work. Thank you for everybody that participated today. Just as a matter of public service announcement, we post any of the slide decks, the biographies, the agenda, any of the material for any of our events in the resource library under resources tab in the Civil Affairs Association website. So for example, for this event, you will have a folder under events for 2023, and then under that for Roundtable, and then you'll find this slide deck as well as the I mentioned. Anything of value is there. You have to be able to log in order to get it. So, all right. So we are now a few minutes. Arnell, are you ready?
He's bounced over to the new room.
Oh, okay. Nick, do you want to pick it up from here? It's your half hour. I don't want to burn too much of it.
Chris, this is Chris Stockwell. Hey, we're switching links. I'm gonna try to post it real quick right here in the chat.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, if you haven't signed in, you got to sign into the other link here.